views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Tonight we're going to talk about criminal justice reform. Through the past several weeks when we moderated debates for city council in the Bronx, this is what we asked the candidates. Crime is up, shootings are up, hate crimes are up, and there's been an out-of-control spike in quality of life issues like jet engine-like exhaust from cars that plague quiet Bronx neighborhoods in the middle of the night. Add to that, many Bronx communities have deep-seated resentment of the NYPD that goes back generations. So, how do we address criminal justice issues and at the same time regain community trust of the police and also keep police officers motivated to do their jobs? Tonight, we're going to turn to the community to see if we can't come up with a model of criminal justice reform that can begin to answer those questions. And in this case, not asking candidates, we're asking folks who are intimately involved in these kinds of issues. So let's introduce our guests. Janos Marton, the National Director for Dream Corps Justice and a former candidate for Manhattan DA. Mr. Marton, nice to have you with us.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me, even though I'm from Manhattan. Well, coming uptown.
Yeah. Well, you give us a little RESPECT and we'll be happy to have you. That's fine. And also Carjah Dawkins-Hamilton, the program director for the Jacoby Hospital's well-known and well-loved Stand Up to Violence. Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton, nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
And the founder of TBS New Direction, the Black Spades. He's also the founder of TBS Security. He recently produced the Black Spades documentary. It's our pleasure to have Mr. Marion Frampton with us. Mr. Frampton, nice to see you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Mr. Marton, even though you're from Manhattan, we're all connected here. Let's really talk about a new attitude toward criminal justice in the city of New York. What do you think? Give us an overview of maybe what's wrong, what your instinct says this needs to be reformed, and then how you might think in general how we should look at it.
Sure. Well, I think there's no question that there is an uneasiness in the city right now, and that's in response to, in some neighborhoods, crime is up. In others, crime isn't really up, but it's perceived to be, right? And perception can drive people's emotions and how people are feeling as much as reality, right? And so I think we can all agree that no matter what the numbers are, there is definitely a tension and uneasiness in the city around crime. And so what does that mean looking forward? We've got a whole new group of people coming into office, from mayor to city council to district attorney. And I think there's consensus to the way you led your show that we have to think about how we can rebuild trust between police and community. We have to invest in the kinds of community-based programs that we know work and often are very successful in local neighborhoods, and think about how those models can work borough-wide or citywide. And we have to, take the temperature down in some of the debates that are going back and forth. I think when debates get hung up on, are you for defund or against defund, it drowns out all the nuanced conversation about community groups like my colleagues on this show who are doing really good work and actually are solving a lot of problems about how we handle young people who are going through traumatic experiences, how we deal with folks who have mental health crises, and how people are struggling with addiction. And the last thing I'll say is, I think we have to be very careful in this moment not to come up with sweeping new solutions based solely on what's happened in the last year. We've gone through an unprecedented year of tumult for everybody, right? I mean, the pandemic being cooped up, people losing their jobs, people losing loved ones. This has been an unprecedented year for the whole city. So we shouldn't just look at what's been going on for the last year and say, okay, now we have to make a whole bunch of new policies because of that. Let's wait and see how things return to normal a little bit as the city reopens, as people get jobs back and as people get back into their usual flow of life.
Yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you are talking about kind of a grassroots look at it, because of course, nobody wins unless everybody wins. And if we don't engage our communities in the process, it's always going to be us against them. You know, I have said a number of times, and we're going to get everybody to weigh in on this, the word defund the police became a flashpoint rather than understanding the concept behind looking at police budgets. It all of a sudden, kind of energized people to say yes, no, when there are many other gray areas. Real quick question before we bring in our other guests. Do you see these as legislative issues, that these, you talked about the new mayor, the new controller, and the new city council. Are these things they have to deal with, or are there things outside that realm that can really look at a new vision of criminal justice reform?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the new mayor, whether, we're down to a couple people who could win, I guess, depending on when the numbers are run. But
right.
Look, the mayor's going to have to choose a police commissioner who's going to set a vision. They're going to have to choose a corrections commissioner. And we finally have a really good one in Vinny Schiraldi for the first time in years, in my opinion. The new mayor is going to figure out, who's going to be running all kinds of agencies that interface with the community and give out sub-grants to community groups. So, the mayor is going to have a lot of big decisions to make. And then the city council is going to have to decide, how they're going to hold the police accountable. I think everybody during the campaign agreed that there need to be some changes around police accountability if trust is going to be rebuilt. So that is a city council function.
Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton, when we talk about criminal justice reform, I take a look at SUV. You guys really started the concept, because what you have proposed and what you're doing at Jacoby Medical Center with the SUV Stand Up to Violence program is taking a new look at criminal justice, at gun violence, and viewing it from as a health problem as opposed to a criminal justice problem. Why don't you just talk philosophically about what you've already presented? You're halfway there at reforming our criminal justice system. Just talk about what you do and why that works.
So basically at the Stand Up to Violence program at Jacoby Medical Center, we really do work with individuals who are highest risk of being shot or shooting someone. And we do that by hiring what's called credible messengers. And our credible messengers are people themselves who have been on the other side of the law, right? So talking about reform and the police reform, it's really taking people who have those kind of experiences, who can now come back and give back to their community, and who've turned their lives around, who can talk to their peers and talk to the people in the community about changes and how they can change their lives and how they can be better and do better. So, our program does that in terms of really working with people one-on-one and figuring out what we can do on a mentorship type of a relationship. And it's been successful for 7 years. And we've taken different approaches in terms of not only are we working with them on young people on an individual basis, but we are also seeing patients who are coming into the hospital who are victim of violent trauma. And so we're talking to them on that level as well about what caused victimization, thoughts of retaliation, what are some services that we can provide while they're with us, whether it's employment, can we connect you with employment services? Can we connect you with housing? What are the other barriers or the other issues that sometimes lead to people being involved in a criminal justice system, other than gun violence, other than just, you're injured and you're somewhere else. So taking a different approach in working with individuals.
I'll give you two things. Number one, do you find that it's successful? Do you say, hey, we're really getting somewhere with this? That's number one. And number two, let's be honest, Chuck Schumer and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just made a big statement about funding this program. So, there's something there, but talk to me about the success of it. And then I definitely want to bring Mr. Frampton in, because what you said, I'm sure, resonates inside his head pretty much. So let's start with you about that.
So in terms of success, what we've noticed prior to this year, of course, this year has been a hard one because due to gun violence, we've seen a decrease in our target areas, over 40% decrease in our target areas in terms of shootings and homicides. And so that's really speaking to the work that our credible messengers are doing every day in the community, in mediating conflicts, in meeting with their participants, and identifying the right people and making sure that they're working with the right people to mentor them and give them a different option or better option. And then also in the hospital, what we've seen is a reduction in people being re-injured and coming back because of a re-injury, and also people following up for their medical care, right? So when they come into the hospital, not only are they getting the medical providers of the surgeons and the nurses and the social workers, but you're also getting somebody to kind of meet them where they're at, like talk to them about what's going on, like what are your thoughts, and normalizing that it's okay to think about want to retaliate. Someone just hurt you, I want to hurt them back, but what are some other things that we can do and what can that lead to? So we've definitely seen successes in those areas, in our patients coming back and building relationships, and also them not coming back for their follow-up appointments and them not being re-injured in the future.
I want you to hold on this question because I definitely want to bring Mr. Frampton in. But really the question is, okay, we've got it at Jacoby, but you know what? Why not at NCB? Why not at Lincoln Hospital? Why not at even the privates in Montefiore, which is the largest, company in the Bronx, et cetera, et cetera. But Mr. Frampton, let's just talk about the Black Spades and the transition and the transformation you individually have gone under to understand these issues, and be able to address this in a logical way, much like the two other guests have done. So just talk to me about what was and what is.
Well, what was that our Black Spades came into existence in 1968.
Wow.
And the founders of the Spades never create this organization as a gang. It wasn't supposed to be a gang. But when the transition of leadership changed from one hand to another hand, it changed over. It changed into fighting for territory, fighting for space, and
so
fighting.
It became a gang, is what you're telling us.
Yes, it became a gang after new leadership, because we wind up fighting. And I'm from the 70s. We wind up fighting for territory. We wind up fighting to survive. And we became the largest street gang in the city of New York.
But now let's bring it to the present, because you've got a whole different vision of this.
I got a whole new concept. I'm trying to bring back what our founders tried to start. You understand? In 1968, 69. And that is, we're giving back now. We're out on the streets. We don't get funded from anyone. We fund ourselves through our dues, or I've worked all my life, so I take money out of my pension, and we go out there on the streets. We're feeding the homeless. We're working with kids and all over the Bronx, because I got brothers and sisters, you understand, in all parts of the Bronx, and we try to reach out to different individuals to talk to them. We don't have a home base. We work the whole Bronx.
What's the attitude? Let's be right up front and very clear. What's the attitude of the people that you talk to, that people that the Black Spades talk to, toward the NYPD? Do they accept it? Do they understand it? Do they respect them? Do they know that we all need police protection? Or is this become an issue that is one of the things that get in the middle of trying to bring peace to our streets?
Well, the attitude of the people is hate, because, in the communities of colors, there has never been a fair issue of treatment amongst us. You understand? And our people don't see it. With the killing of George Floyd, it brought a new perspective to the young people, because it was seen. We're not experiencing anything different today, except for through technology, where we can now see and hear our people being killed. We've been killed for over 400 years, but now we see it. And the attitude of the young people today are much more radical than mine.
Well, Mr. Marton knows I'm coming right to him with this. So here you go. And I'm going to give you both sides, because I talked to a police officer before we did this show, someone who's a friend of mine. You hear what Mr. Frampton says. That is real. That is not pretend. There is, and he used the 4-letter word hate. On the other hand, police officers, they say quite clearly, we're worried. We're worried about qualified immunity. We're worried about, every little thing we do. The next thing, we got a tough job. We go into dangerous situations. We don't feel like doing our jobs because everything we try, we get beat on. How do we come up with a system that punishes the relatively small percentage of cops who do wrong, but also keeps everybody safe? I know that's the toughest question I probably could have asked you, but so where are you at? What do you think?
You asked me,
Mr. Marton. Yeah, we'll do that.
Well, one of the things I was hearing with Mr. Frampton's response is that, the sort of hate and distrust is born out of, 400 years of mistreatment, oppression, and, in recent years, continued lack of investment in these communities, right? And so to boil it down to the interaction between the police officer and the young man on the street, that by the time it's gotten to that point, a lot of other things have gone wrong, right? And so I think with the one opportunity we have, new administration, new city council is, all these people, regardless of whether you voted for them or not, all of them voted on a whole bunch of promises to improve conditions in the community and put people in a position where hopefully they get a better education, hopefully they get better housing, hopefully they get better healthcare. And if we deliver on those things, I think that's going to, reduce some of that tension in the community. I mean, by the time somebody is disillusioned, and, it's young men, usually young men of color, who feel the most disillusioned and react in ways that are harmful to the community. By the time they get to that point, a lot of other things have gone wrong in the system, so I think we have to lift up that. And also, I work with an organization called All Kings that does work in Harlem and Brooklyn. And, another thing that I think we need to be innovative about in the years ahead is we know a lot more about trauma that young people experience than we used to. I mean, nobody talked about that stuff when I was growing up, or I assume.
And we're talking about regular kids. We're not talking about kids who, are in the middle of, let's say, gangs or some other issue.
Yeah.
They see it all the time.
They see it all the time. And by the time, you're 18, 20 and, you get caught up with the law, there's a lot of unprocessed stuff that you're carrying with you. And we know so much more about that than we used to. Like I said, when all of us were growing up, that wasn't even talked about, at least anywhere that I was familiar with. And I think, with All Kings, we try to create safe spaces for young men to be able to talk about that stuff with older men and, help them process that. So, we can definitely, there's a million ways we can look at how police can do their jobs better and, what we can do with young people who are already in trouble with the law. But the reality is, by the time the policeman is intervening and by the time the young man is, sitting in the Tombs or at Rikers or wherever, a bunch of other things have already gone wrong, and we have to do a much better job on the front end. And, I think that's something where there's a lot of good ideas already out there, a lot of good programs.
Mr. Frampton, and then we're going to talk guns with Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton. Mr. Frampton, how do you address that hate between the much needed police officers and the young people that that you deal with and you see? And give me a short answer, because I definitely want to bring Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton into this.
A lot of the guys, the kids on the street. Let me tell you something. That blue wall of silence is what make our kids distrust the police. Over the years, we done had police that just killed people in front, and even when cameras, and they won't speak out. We got, in order for us to treat each other and trust each other, they got to cut out that blue wall of silence. Or when a cop do something, or we can't talk about him.
That becomes a legislative issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and you want the community. They want the community to stand up, but they don't stand up against each other. It's a two-way street where we have to set. And I believe that change can come, but it's only gonna come when we decide to understand the community stand up for themselves and do what they have to do. And this blue wall of silence, you stand there and watch one of your own kill somebody, but it tells you you can't talk against them because you wear the same uniform. That's out. And with Floyd, it changed a whole,
it crystallized a lot of things. Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton, in San
Yes.
Jose, the city council voted to establish a yet to be determined gun owner fee. So anybody who has a gun is going to have to, pay a fee to help cover the cost of gunshot related police and ambulance response and medical treatment, et cetera. They also want to require gun owners to purchase liability insurance. Is that I'm assuming you would support that kind of legislation, but to me, all that is talk if we don't close that iron pipeline, if we don't keep the guns from flowing into New York City, and all of the great work that you do in addressing these things. I feel like that's the one thing that would really help.
Well, honestly, New York State has some really good gun laws, as we all know, right? So it's not necessarily New York State that's the issue; it's the rest of the country that needs to really catch up. So I think in terms of New York, we're doing a great job, but the gun laws need to be a federal implementation, very similar to what we have in New York. It needs to be across the country, and then we can have conversations about what that's going to look like and come down to in our communities. That's just how I view things.
I talked earlier about duplicating your program, and I named I called out other medical institutions. Is it simply a matter of funding? Like if we said to NCB or to Lincoln or to any other medical facility, here's X amount of money, similar monies maybe that came from Schumer and AOC, they could do it. Is that what it is? Do you think there's enough state of mind to do this?
I think it does come down to, of course, funding, right? When you can fund something, it does help. But also in terms of oversight, like this type of programs, it's really hard to put a number on the amount of shootings that you prevent. So in terms of getting the data, you always have to show proof of what's working and what's not working, right, in our communities. And so oversight is always important when it comes to this type of work. And I think it can be difficult to have oversight over a program that you really have to work hand in hand with the community. It's not I'm telling you what to do and this is what you do. You're working hand in hand with the community. You're working hand in hand with your
right? You got to listen.
Yeah, you got to listen. What are the community needs? What are some things that we need to address, right? There's been, due to COVID, we've changed a lot of how we do things, right? So in the beginning, we were giving out masks. That's not something that we usually do, give out masks and hand sanitizers, but that was what the community needed at the time. And being able to be flexible enough to adjust rather to the needs of the community. So I think it's really being creative, being innovative, and also the funding goes a long way.
Has got to go a long way. Mr. Marton, just we talked about the catchphrase defund the police. The other thing that is out there is bail reform. And that I talked to a police officer, and she told me that bail reform is a big thing. That they arrest somebody for a serious crime, they book them. By the time they finish their shift, that person is already collecting his or her belongings and leaving the station house because they're back in the street. And she said, I had to arrest somebody a second time for a rape because they did one, then they were put back out in the street. How do we balance, or do we need to readjust the bail reform that came out of the state? What was it, a year or 2 years ago? Or is, protecting the innocent, so to speak, so important that we're willing to make that sacrifice?
Yeah, I think there often is a lot of misinformation about the impact of bail reform in terms of who's being let out and who's not. In that particular example, if somebody is accused of rape, they don't automatically get out on the street, even under the new bail law, right? What the new bail law did in 2019 is say that if you're accused of a pretty wide set of minor offenses, and that's the top charge, then bail can't be set in that case. And when you think about it, that makes sense. And if the maximum penalty isn't that severe, then you should be able to fight your case from home. It's not like the charges are dropped, right? People still have to come into court and you still have a case hanging over you. If you're charged with something serious, including gun cases, right, then the DA can still ask for bail, the judge can still set bail. There are situations in those cases where people might have bail set and they pay it and then they get out. And the police officer might be upset about that, but that is sort of how our system of justice works.
So are you
Yeah.
looking for a reform of the bail reform, or
No,
right now you think that it can work?
I think that the bail laws, as we reform them in 2019, are good. It's good laws. I think they're a good model for the rest of the country. I don't think having cash to get out should be the standard of justice. I think people who are legally innocent should be able to fight their cases from home, just like wealthy people do on a daily basis. But I think, and to circle it back to, what Miss Dawkins-Hamilton and was talking about, like, we got to support people who get into issues, right? And we got to make sure people have access to resources. And so there's a way to do that through the criminal court system. And, I hope the next, the district attorneys look at, if somebody gets in trouble with the law, okay, maybe we're not going to set bail, but we can, recommend certain services for them. But yeah, I think the bail laws as they exist are actually fine. And, I think there some people sort of fearmonger about them, like that rape example.
I pulled a quote from you. If I see somebody showing up in criminal court for the same thing for the fifth or sixth time, then obviously what we were doing before is not working, and we need to try something different. We see recidivists all the time. You got about 30 seconds, and we're going to go around the room to kind of conclude. What do you think? Is this a legislative thing? Is this a thing that judges or DAs need to have a different look? How do we reform that?
DAs need, what I meant by that is, if somebody is, I know I got 30 seconds, so I'll be quick. Yeah, if somebody's struggling with the same issue, and usually if you see somebody in court, 10 times in a row for the same thing, there might be an addiction issue, there might be a mental health issue. Just sending them to jail for 3 days or 2 weeks and then they come back, that's not going to work. So how can we come up with programs that actually help people get back on their feet? So the DAs have a role in making sure those programs are an option, but then they have to be funded at the city and state level.
Right. Mr. Frampton, I know I'm going to just say it. You have a little chip on your shoulder because you do all this work. You have a lot of people who do this work, yet you don't have a 501c3. And I was thinking about this. Maybe there's a way of coming up with getting you the support to get that 501c3, so then you can qualify for some of the funding, let's say that goes to Jacoby or to some of these other programs. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, my thoughts about it is
I need about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. Just to correct you, 2 weeks ago, my 501c just came through.
Oh, now we're talking.
But I've been doing this work.
Scratch that question. Forget that.
But no, keep that question, because I've been doing this work for 4 years, and we're out on the streets. We're doing what we got to do. There's a lot of groups out there that don't have 501c3s. We are doing the work. It may not be amount of work that people with funding have, because they can move faster, get around faster, but we're doing the same work. And I think there need to be a way for these groups to fall under umbrellas to where money can come down and people can get funded.
Got it. Listen, we're rooting for you, and we're rooting for all the groups that do this. Ms. Dawkins-Hamilton, just talk to me about what's next. Expand the program, extend the program. You got no more than 30 seconds.
Next, we're planning to, once we do get the funding, hopefully from AOC and Jamal Bowman, the plan is to really be able to offer more therapeutic services. Like Mr. Martin expressed, what we've noticed is a lot of our young people are traumatized. There's a lot of trauma in our communities, and we really need to start that healing process. So that's our next step, is to expand, provide more mental health services.
Got it. We got to run. Listen, maybe you folks can work together, and then we'll really get something going. So we've made the introduction. We got to go. Next week, we're going to talk about a new look at the shelter system. So we'll see you then. Good night.